The Ethiopian Bible is one of the most intriguing and fascinating elements in the rich history of Christianity over the centuries. It represents a unique manifestation of religious tradition, containing sacred texts that are revered by many, reflecting the diversity of beliefs and practices within this faith. Some people consider it to be the oldest Bible in existence, or even the most comprehensive of all the others, because it really does present a significant diversity of different texts, including the famous Book of Enoch, which is well known in the religious tradition. Its origins can be traced back to the ancient kingdom of Aksum, which is recognized as the first kingdom in Africa to officially adopt Christianity. In addition, there are those who claim that the connections between the Bible and Ethiopia are even more remote and can be traced back to ancient times, when it is believed that the enigmatic Queen of Sheba paid a visit to King Solomon in the city of Jerusalem, right? This account is a narrative that, according to tradition, provides an explanation as to why the Ark of the Covenant is currently in Ethiopia, supposedly located in this particular church. In this video, we will explore in detail all the pertinent issues in order to discern what is really true and what is merely a legend. What's more, we'll try to gain a deeper understanding of this phenomenon, which is so unique, isn't it? Ethiopian Christianity, its historical roots and its sacred scriptures are aspects that are fairly little known and often not explored in depth. If the intention is to start this narrative at the right point, in line with Ethiopia's own tradition, it is necessary to go back approximately 3,000 years in time. In this remote period, there was an African queen named Makeda who, on learning about a man of remarkable justice and wisdom who ruled a distant kingdom thousands of kilometers to the north, was intrigued and motivated to find out more about this ruler. There was a man called Solomon. The stories describing this king's immense greatness and splendor had come to the queen's attention through a merchant who had recently come into contact with this information, hadn't he? In the days leading up to this moment, he had led a large number of camels, along with boats that were full of gold, silver, and precious stones, taking them directly to that specific location. Queen Maka, who is also known as the Queen of Sheba, was totally amazed by the stories she heard about King Solomon, according to historical accounts. In response, she decided to summon the leading members of her court, organized a great transport carrying an immense amount of camels and mules full of various treasures, and set off towards Solomon's kingdom. When they finally arrived, the two actually met, exchanging gifts and discussing a variety of subjects over several days, with a special focus on sacred themes. At the end of this exchange, the queen made a significant declaration. From that moment on, she decided that she would no longer worship the sun, but rather venerate the creator of the sun, who is the God of Israel. So she returned to her own kingdom, taking with her not only the faith she had acquired through her contact with King Solomon, but also, surprisingly, an heir of Solomon within her womb. In fact, the two established a relationship during their stay. The son resulting from this relationship grew up, and 20 years later, he made the decision to visit Israel to meet his father again. When he arrived, he was received with dignified honors, as if he were King Solomon himself. The people around noticed a great physical resemblance between the two, which caught everyone's attention. Solomon himself, on observing his son's appearance, was extremely impressed, as it bore a striking resemblance to his own. This resemblance was so obvious that in an instant, Solomon understood clearly and immediately that the young man in front of him was, in fact, his biological son. It was, in fact, his eldest son, and he declared that he should assume the role of successor to the throne of Israel. However, the young man, called Menelik, who was already an adult, rejected this proposal because he had made a commitment to return to his mother's land, which was also his homeland, Ethiopia. Faced with this situation, Solomon then made a new suggestion, that Menelik return to Ethiopia, but on the condition that he return as king, thus establishing a union between the two kingdoms. In addition, he offered that Menelik who accepted this proposal would be anointed with oil, following the priestly tradition of the Israelite people. To this end, a court made up of Israelites, who were the sons of important Jerusalem figures, would travel with him back to Africa. And this is where the discussion about the Ark of the Covenant comes in, right? According to this tradition, the Israelites who were sent with Solomon's son made the decision to take the Holy Ark with them, acting discreetly so that no one would be aware of the act. It's interesting to note that Solomon, upon realizing the absence of the Ark, only becomes aware of what has happened when his son is already a considerable distance from Jerusalem. Thus, motivated by the realization that the Ark has been transported without his knowledge, Solomon decides that he must go after it. The situation therefore reveals the urgency and importance that the Ark had for him, as well as the Israelites' ability to carry out the action secretly. He takes an army there to go after Menelik's group, But Menelik's group had already traveled an enormous distance without stopping and without obstacles, practically flying, because God's own angels had helped this group not only to escape with the ark, but to obtain the ark itself. All of this, according to tradition, was a divine plan. So Menelik arrives in Ethiopia. His mother abdicates the throne in his favor, and he begins a series of military campaigns, winning every battle. Thanks to the presence of the Ark of the Covenant and what it signifies, which is the presence and favor of God. And meanwhile, Solomon is deeply distressed in Jerusalem because he realizes that God has transferred his favor from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, and he ends up seeking comfort in his wives, especially his Egyptian wife, the daughter of Pharaoh, who ends up convincing Solomon to worship other gods, and therefore, according to this story, the legitimate Solomonic Davidic dynasty ends in Israel and begins in Ethiopia, and therefore, also according to this tradition, the Ark of the Covenant arrived in Ethiopia, where it supposedly remains to this day. According to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the real Ark is kept in the Chapel of the Tablets near the Church of St. Mary of Zion. Furthermore, all the churches belonging to the Orthodox tradition, as well as those in Ethiopia, have replicas of the tablets representing the covenant in their interiors, which are stored in their respective sacred areas known as the Holy of Holies. It's interesting to note that each of these churches is particularly dedicated to consecrating these tablets to different saints, including venerated figures such as Saint Michael, Saint Gabriel, Saint Mary, Saint George, among others. Okay, that's great, but what is the truth and what can be considered a fictitious creation within this narrative? The story we're discussing first appears in a work entitled Kebra Nagast, Glory of the Kings, which is presented as the document that records the discussion between the 318 members of the Council of Nicaea. This council, held in the 4th century, was of great importance in the history of Christianity, as it brought together Christian leaders to debate fundamental theological and doctrinal issues. The work therefore not only recounts the events, but also serves as a source that helps to understand the context and implications of the discussions that took place there. The Council of Nicaea, which took place in the 1st century of the Christian era, is undoubtedly a significant historical event, although at the same time it is important to clarify that it did not take place in the scenario that is commonly imagined. It is an important milestone in the history of Christianity. There is no documentation or evidence of any kind that even indirectly comes close to the dialogue on Ethiopia involving King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Furthermore, there is also no orographic or written mention of the council that could be expected in similar contexts. What's more, the content of the text is largely legendary, which suggests that it was composed at a much later date, possibly in the 10th century. After the era of Christ, there was a significant period in which a new dynasty had recently taken political control and was looking for historical ways to legitimize itself in the eyes of society and the government. This dynasty, which sought to consolidate its power, would come to be identified as the Solomonic dynasty. Because of factors such as these, contemporary historians show a strong skeptical attitude towards the content of the Kebra Nagast, which is a literary work that tells the story of the lineage of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, covering up to 6 generations of the city of Aksum and the new dynasty in question. A respected professor from Boston University, when referring to this work, expressed the opinion that the account contained in the Kebra Nagast, which is presented in a very imaginative and emotional way, about the descent of Solomon and Sheba, is extremely improbable and does not find support in concrete evidence. Thus, for him, this narrative is considered more of a myth than a historical truth. The groups mentioned maintained practices such as observing the Sabbath, circumcising boys on the 8th day after their birth, as well as following rules relating to purity, which are linked to aspects such as sex, menstruation, and even diet, among others. However, it is a pity that the origin of these customs cannot be established historically and precisely, and it is not known exactly when these traditions began in Ethiopia, which creates a certain amount of uncertainty in this matter. What if these practices and customs we are discussing come from interactions that took place a long time ago with people from the Jewish tradition, such as travelers who came from that region or traders who passed through? Another possibility is that these customs were incorporated directly from teachings contained in the Old Testament, correct? After the process of Christianization that took place in that particular region, is it correct to say that? This is a question that is still being debated regarding the Ark that is kept in the Chapel of the Sacred Tablets, since only a select group of members of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church are authorized to have access to this object of great spiritual and historical importance. In this way, we are not talking about an object that has been made available to the general public or to researchers so that they can carry out some research or study on it. Although she does not possess such an object, it is clear that, despite all the secrecy that is understandable in this context, there are a number of scholars who claim to have had access to the Ark of the Covenant. Among these scholars is a professor who specializes in the study of Ethiopia and who teaches at the University of London. This professor made some interesting observations about what he saw, describing the Ark as a wooden box which, curiously, was empty. He categorized it as a production dating back to the Middle Ages, or more specifically to the end of that period, when objects of this type were made to order in a meticulous and careful manner. Thus, to date, there is no evidence to support the claim that the Ark of the Covenant found in the Chapel of the Tablets is the same Ark of the Covenant mentioned in the Bible. This issue in itself is so controversial that it merits an exclusive video covering all aspects of this intriguing topic. From this perspective, the narrative involving Solomon and the Queen of Sheba is not the only link that the Ethiopian Church establishes with its biblical roots. There is also a significant mention in the New Testament describing the story of an Ethiopian eunuch who was baptized by the Apostle Philip. This passage therefore emphasizes another important connection between Ethiopia and the Christian tradition, highlighting the country's relevance in the history of the Christian faith since ancient times. The text mentions that this particular eunuch was serving at the court of Candace, which is the name given to the queen of the Ethiopians. He had traveled to Jerusalem with the intention of taking part in acts of worship. This individual from Ethiopia was baptized and then continued his journey. In the Bible, the story ends at this point, but according to later traditions, he is believed to have returned to Ethiopia, where he preached the gospel. However, this narrative also faces difficulties in terms of historical proof. This is primarily due to the fact that, in ancient times, the word Ethiopian did not refer to a single people or a specific nation, but rather encompassed different cultural groups and contexts. Therefore, the ambiguous nature of the term makes it difficult to accurately attribute this historical event. The term Ethiopia has the meaning of burnt face and was used by the ancient Greeks, as well as other peoples, to refer to practically any individual who had a darker skin tone in the vast region that encompasses parts of Africa and Arabia. Therefore, when encountering the word Ethiopia in ancient texts, including the Bible, it is important to realize that this designation could refer to a wide range of locations, covering not only Sudan and Eritrea, but also the territory of Ethiopia itself and even areas that today belong to Yemen, among other places. This leads us to reflect on how geographical and ethnic categories were interpreted quite differently in antiquity, highlighting the flexibility of the use of the term. When the text lacks additional information that can provide a clearer context, it becomes impossible to reach a definitive conclusion, and this is precisely what happens in relation to Ethiopia, as mentioned in the New Testament. In addition, it is important to point out that even if we accept the hypothesis that the eunuch who was baptized by Philip belonged concretely to the kingdom of Aum, located in contemporary Ethiopia, the influence that his preaching could have generated would undoubtedly have been quite limited, correct? Not enough to leave a lasting mark on history. This is due to the fact that it was only in the 4th century after Christ that Christianity really got a foothold in Ethiopia, and it was only after this milestone that the famous Ethiopian Bible appeared. At this point, we can explore a little more about the Ethiopian Bible and then return to examine other fascinating details about the process of Christianization in Ethiopia, an extremely interesting topic. Now, focusing specifically on the Ethiopian Bible, several aspects distinguish it and make it a unique work. To begin with, it's important to emphasize that it contains a greater number of books than any other version of the Bible. While Bibles that follow the Protestant tradition usually include 66 books and the Catholic version has 73 books, the Bible of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is officially recognized as comprising 81 sacred texts. Among the various books that make up this collection is the Book of Enoch, which presents claims of revelations that would have been received by the patriarch Enoch, who is known as the grandfather of Noah, a figure who is referenced in the Old Testament of the Bible. In the content of this book, stories are told that deal with significant events, such as the appearance of the fallen angels and the rebellion they promoted, right? These narratives deal not only with the origin of these celestial beings, but also with the conflicts and consequences resulting from their actions. Giants are beings of great stature, often described in stories, mythologies, and literature as colossal creatures with dimensions that surpass ordinary humans. In various cultures, these beings are portrayed with extraordinary characteristics, such as extraordinary strength and superhuman abilities. In addition, giants often play significant roles in narratives, and can be either antagonists or protagonists, depending on the context of the story. In classical mythologies, such as Greek or Norse, they are often associated with elements of nature or primordial forces, reflecting the admiration and fear that human beings have for these imposing figures. The genesis of giant beings? The origin of demons is a subject that involves various beliefs and myths that transcend cultures and eras. These evil entities, often associated with evil, have roots in religious, folkloric, and literary traditions. In many traditions, demons are considered to be beings who have strayed from a heavenly or divine condition, choosing to follow a path of opposition to good and light. In some narratives, these beings appear as fallen angels who, after rebelling against God, were expelled from heaven and condemned to wander the earth, seeking to corrupt humanity. In addition, in various cultures, demons can also be seen as manifestations of the forces of nature or as portrayals of human fears and anxieties. Thus, the origin of demons can be understood as an intricate complex of stories and interpretations that reflect humanity's ethical and existential dilemmas throughout history. Finally, we deal with subjects that we have already covered in various other videos that have been presented previously. In addition to the recognized canonical books, the Bible contains the so-called Book of Jubilees, which is presented as a set of revelations received by Moses on Mount Sinai. The purpose of this book is to interpret and expand on various themes that are already present in the book of Genesis. There is also an extensive text called Joseph, which is a chronicle of the history of the Jewish people, based on the writings of the historian Flavius Josephus, an author who lived in the 1st century of the Christian era. You can also find letters attributed to Bishop Clement of Rome, as well as a collection of ecclesiastical definitions and norms known as synods. Due to the magnitude and diversity of these works, it would not be feasible to list or comment on all of them at this time. This impossibility is due not only to the limited time available for the video presentation, but actually reflects an even more complex situation. The authorities of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church themselves do not have a clear consensus on exactly which 81 books make up their sacred canon. It is widely recognized and accepted by many that there are, in fact, exactly 81 books. This assertion is supported by various sources and understandings of the totality of the work in question. Today, the question of which literary works form part of this list remains unknown, a topic that is still debated and discussed today. An expert in the study of Ethiopian liturgy clarifies the situation, saying that in Ethiopia there really isn't a defined canon in the way that this concept is understood in other traditions. Instead of considering the existence of a single Bible, we should bear in mind that there is a significant diversity of codices containing a variety of books. These codices do not necessarily comprise the same works, and the titles they present do not ensure that the content is identical in all of them. Thus, as an author, I prefer to avoid characterizing a specific Ethiopian canon. Instead, it is more appropriate to approach this question from the perspective of lists of works, which in themselves do not determine how different writings are received or interpreted, according to another author's observations. To say that the Bible contains exactly 81 books is, in fact, a question that involves more dogma than a simple arithmetical calculation. So we're not talking about a list that you can simply add up and see that the total comes to 81. In fact, you start from a predefined number, which is 81, and proceed to count in a different way, being able to include or exclude certain books, as well as subdividing others in order to arrive at the figure of 81. So the reality is that there isn't a single volume, a single agglomeration of pages, or even a library or set of books that can be definitively designated as the Bible. In fact, this is not correct. In reality, there is no official version that can be considered the complete Bible or anything that resembles it. What actually exists is a selection of texts that are more conventionally accepted and, in addition, a diversity of other texts that are centered around this central core. Therefore, when it comes to the question of whether the Tyop Bible can be considered the most complete in the world, it is essential to clarify what is meant by a Bible that is complete, since Protestants and Catholics, for example, have different understandings of which books should actually make up the canon, which is the set of texts that are legitimately recognized as part of the Bible. The Bible, although widely recognized and respected, is not considered the most complete among the different religious groups. In fact, it is perceived as a set of texts that contains too many books, especially for Orthodox and Ethiopian Christians. These groups have a distinct and differentiated view of what constitutes the canon of Scripture, leading to an interpretation that diverges from the other canons used by different Christian traditions. This diversity of opinions reflects the complexities and nuances in the formation and acceptance of sacred texts within Christianity. In this way, the claim that the Bible is more comprehensive and complete is closely related to specific dogmatic aspects that vary according to each religious tradition, reflecting different interpretations and practices, rather than just a purely numerical issue, correct? As the Bible contains a greater number of books, it becomes progressively more complete and comprehensive. This multiplicity of texts contributes to a richer and deeper diversity in the content that the work offers. The question that arises is about the variation of works that you imagine the Bible contains, isn't it? Therefore, This expectation is fundamental to understanding the answer to this question. If I decided to insert, as an example, the classic works known as the Iliad and the Odyssey into a Bible, it is quite likely that many people would not conclude that this compendium would become more comprehensive or complete because of this addition. They would probably comment that these books are too many, wouldn't they? So once again, it's a question of intrinsic definition. Traditional dogmatics undoubtedly has its virtues, but there is also another issue related to the Bible that deserves attention. When you come across the oldest Bible, the oldest known in history, this usually refers to the manuscript known as Garima II. This is an illuminated manuscript, i.e. one that has detailed color illustrations, created with a special method on parchment, which was probably produced from goatskin. In addition, this manuscript is highly significant because it contains the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, which are fundamental to understanding the Christian message. Therefore, the relevance of this historical record is undeniable. The precise date on which this manuscript was created remains very hazy and uncertain. However, results from radiocarbon tests indicate that it was produced between the years 390 and 570 of the Christian era, which means that it may have been produced at the end of the 1st century or even during the 6th century. It is worth emphasizing that the oldest illuminated manuscript containing the Gospels, which is the focus of our discussion, can in no way be considered the oldest manuscript in the entire Bible, nor is it even the oldest of the manuscripts containing the Gospels. It's important to point out that I've already produced a specific video here on the channel dealing with the oldest manuscripts in the Bible, but in order to revisit the fundamental aspects, let's briefly summarize them, shall we? The oldest existing manuscripts containing biblical texts are known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These documents, which were discovered in caves near the Dead Sea, date predominantly from the period between the 3rd century and the 1st century before the Common Era. Thus, it is possible to say that their origin is much earlier than that of Garima II, which is a remarkable Ethiopian manuscript, or any other manuscript from that region and time. The relevance of the Dead Sea Scrolls therefore stands out not only because of their antiquity, but also because of their importance for the study of the textual traditions that make up the Bible. The oldest known document containing a text from the New Testament, or at least a fragment that is part of this set of sacred writings, is considered to be of great historical and academic importance. This manuscript, being the oldest, offers valuable insights into the form and transmission of early Christian texts, allowing for a better understanding of the development and evolution of the scriptures over time. The oldest known copy is Papyrus 52, which is owned by the John Rylands Library and has been dated to the 2nd century of the Christian era. The manuscripts that are considered to be the oldest complete Christian Bibles are known as the Sinaitic and Vatican Codices, both from this important historical context dating back to the 4th century after Christ. On the other hand, when we look at the manuscripts that represent complete Bibles in Hebrew, we find the Sassum Aleppo and Leningradensis codices. These Hebrew codices, in turn, are dated to the 9th or 10th century, signaling the importance and antiquity of such texts throughout history. If we consider that the 10th century after Christ occurs in a more recent period when compared to Garima II and other Ethiopian manuscripts, we can conclude that this comparison really becomes inadequate and purposeless. This is because, by putting together information from such different historical periods and with completely different chronologies, we are unable to establish a clear or valid understanding of the documents in question. Therefore, it is clear that the analysis makes no sense, since we are dealing with contexts that do not overlap temporally. The Bible manuscripts from Ethiopia, contrary to what one might think, are not written in Hebrew, but in the Gesh language, which is an ancient Ethiopian language. This language, rich in history and traditions, continues to be used as the official language in the liturgy of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to this day. Thus, when analyzing the question of the antiquity of these biblical manuscripts, it is important to note that they are considered the oldest only in the category of illuminated manuscripts, i.e. copies that are artistically adorned and illustrated. Therefore, this aspect must be considered in the broader context of research and the study of the scriptures. In this way, we can say that the rich Ethiopian tradition stands out in a remarkable way due to the presence of several illuminated manuscripts that are true works of art, and that these manuscripts represent one of the most distinctive and valuable characteristics of this cultural tradition. Therefore, to conclude this discussion, it only remains to address the question of who was responsible for actually introducing the Bible itself, as well as belief in Christianity, to Ethiopian territory. It is important to know the dates that mark the arrival of the first Bible in Ethiopia, as well as the identification of the first Jew or Christian who may have set foot in that territory. However, from a historical point of view, this information is extremely difficult to pinpoint exactly. On the other hand, it is possible to determine when this region began to be ruled by Christian monarchs and when the local population became predominantly Christian, which is a significant aspect of Ethiopian history. This phenomenon began to occur from the 4th century of the Common Era, marking a significant change in the historical context. There are several historical sources that attest to the fact that the first bishop of Ethiopia was named Frumentius. This man was a Christian from the city of Tyre, which today forms part of the territory of Lebanon. During the period in question, he was appointed Bishop of Alexandria, located in Egypt, by Athanasius, a significant figure in the church. It should also be noted that Frumentius played a crucial role in the conversion to Christianity of Ina, an Ethiopian king who stood out for being the first African monarch to adopt this faith. There are records, such as coins and inscriptions, dating back to the time of the aforementioned king, which show a significant connection with Christianity. Furthermore, in the following century, which corresponds to the 5th century, there was a movement in which missionaries were sent by the Roman Empire to the region of Ethiopia. Among these missionaries was Garima, whose name is associated with the Gospels that bear his name. With the aim of spreading the Christian faith, these missionaries worked in villages and remote rural areas, as well as founding the first monasteries in the area. They also apparently began a more elaborate project, which was not restricted to translating the Bible into Guinean, but involved a broader and deeper work of evangelization. It's worth noting that, during this same period, there are records of a Byzantine emperor who requested help from King Caleb of Aksum. It is important to note the reference to the name of this Ethiopian king, who played a significant role in supporting Christians who were facing persecution in Yemen. In addition, during the 6th century, travelers' reports began to appear documenting the presence of various Christian churches throughout Ethiopia, where the gospel of Christ was proclaimed and spread. It is also remarkable that, even in the face of the growing influence and expansion of Islam from the 6th century onwards, Ethiopia remained predominantly Christian, preserving its religious identity over time. A traveler from Portugal, dating back to the 10th century, made the following observation: "No other country on the planet is as full of houses of worship, churches, monasteries, and the presence of clerics as Abyssinia." It's important to remember that this is a traditional name for what we know today as Ethiopia. Furthermore, it is remarkable that when a chant is sung in one church, the melody can be heard in another church nearby, or even in several of them simultaneously. These individuals have an innate inclination towards kindness and generosity, thus demonstrating an altruistic character in their donations and almsgiving. In addition, they have a habit of attending church regularly, showing great commitment to religious activities. They are also extremely careful and dedicated when it comes to their liturgical adornments, showing a zeal that reflects their deep devotion. As far as religious practices are concerned, they adopt fasting and other forms of mortification, thus maintaining a spiritual fervor that is largely reminiscent of the intense devotion of the first Christians. In the narrative we explored earlier, we looked at the figure of the son of the Queen of Sheba. It is interesting to note that for many centuries the flag representing the Ethiopian Empire displayed the image of the Lion of Judah, which was accompanied by wings, presenting a deep and meaningful symbolism. This tradition lasted until the last monarch of the so-called Solomonic dynasty was removed from power in a coup d'état. This king's name is well known, and many of you may have heard it on other occasions. His name was Haile Selassie. This dignitary is widely recognized by the Rastafarian movement, where he is referred to as J. However, this is a narrative that deserves to be explored further in a video dedicated exclusively to it. To summarize, it can be said that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has extremely ancient origins, can't it? Especially with regard to the spread of Christianity during the 4th century of our era, it's important to consider that this expansion may have been influenced by interactions that took place earlier with Jewish and Christian communities. These cultural and religious exchanges may have played a significant role in shaping the foundations of this emerging religion. They did cross through the area in question, however. Historical confirmation of this fact proves somewhat challenging. Furthermore, this region was responsible for the production and preservation of a version of the Bible that is quite distinctive in comparison to the others. This work contains a considerably larger number of texts, as well as having broader borders. Furthermore, from a material and artistic point of view, it is remarkably well crafted. Although it is not the oldest of them all, it undoubtedly has peculiarities that make it stand out. The religious practice in question is extremely old and has been rigorously respected over the centuries. It is, in a way, one of the fundamental pillars supporting this faith, which has remained vibrant and culturally significant for over 1,000 years, in the case of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. I sincerely thank you for listening and for following this video to the end. May God bless you deeply and abundantly, and may we meet again in our next video.